In this lesson, we're going to take a look at SnapShot 3D. SnapShot 3D is a method of creating geometry in ZBrush that uses the spotlight in conjunction with alphas. Now, the way this works is, I've got the Wasteland Warrior model up on screen right now. There's some elements in here which are Booleans. These little tubes, for example, create the vents in his respirator. If I go to the subtool menu here, you can see that these are set to subtract from the main head. So if I turn on Live Boolean, you see those actually subtract. So SnapShot 3D allows you to create Boolean objects like this on the fly and build up a complex form of new geometry, basically using alphas to do all the generation. So I'm going to go to the Lightbox menu. Under the Lightbox, at the top of the screen here, we've got a variety of different menus. You've seen these before. We are going to go to Spotlight. And in the Spotlight menu, we have a series of alphas here that allow us to create different pieces. So I'm just going to start with the 512 Hard Surface Spotlight. Now this opens a Spotlight. If you press the Z key, that will enable the Spotlight interface. Press the Z key again, and the Spotlight interface goes away. If I press Z and then click on the background and drag, I can move all of these alphas down so they're visible on screen. Now, if I leave the Spotlight interface, I can rotate and position my object on screen. I'll press the Z key again, and I'm going to select the circle alpha here. Now, my preference is not to work on the original alpha. I like to work on a copy. So I'm going to press the duplicate button right here. That duplicates a copy of that mesh or that image, so I can drag this over. That's just kind of good work habit. It helps you keep your originals unchanged, so you can always go back to just a clean circle if you like. To move the object around, just click between the image and the outer circle. To click the circle itself, this orange circle, click inside of it or on it, you can move the interface. The interface will snap to the edges of the image or to the center of the image. Now, if I start to move this towards the model, it's going to give me the option to snap there to the mesh center. So there is the mesh mid-edge. If we mouse around here, we'll find the other points that we can click on. So right now, it's grabbing onto the scarf. So I'm going to select the head itself. Now when I move around here, I can snap to the center of the head. I'll use the scale button to scale this up and then position it over the ear. We're going to make sort of a communications device here. So I will scale that up. Now, my currently selected tool is the head. If I click the SnapShot 3D button, it doesn't appear that anything's happened. We've just gotten these extra little dots here. If I press Z, that turns off the interface. If I press Shift-Z, that turns off Spotlight entirely. Now, if I rotate off to the side, you see we have actually generated a piece of geometry, and it's picking up its depth from the subtools underneath it. So I'm going to press the W key for the gizmo. And you see that it's automatically selected that mesh that we just created. I will scale this down and then just move it in the Z axis so it's sitting about where I'd like it to sit. Like so. Now, if I press the Z key again, it'll bring back the Spotlight interface. So I'll just move my mesh over here, and then press the Z key, and then click on the image, and it will snap to the center of the object. So this is handy. It allows me to snap these images to the border or the center or the corners of the piece that I just created. So this time we'll do something a little bit different. I can use the frame button. If I click and drag frame, it will create this sort of extrusion like this. Now, instead of just clicking SnapShot 3D, if you look at the top of the screen here, it'll give you a tooltip. If you shift-click, it will append it to the current subtool. If you alt-click, it will create a new subtraction tool. And if you click Alt-Shift, it will create an intersection tool. So let's try a subtraction tool. I'm going to Alt-click this. Now you see what it's done. It's created a new piece of geometry there, but this time it's picked up the thickness from this tool and it's set it to subtract. So I'll press Shift Z to turn off the Spotlight interface, and you see what's happening there is it's subtracting from everything beneath it, or from everything above it, I should say. If I go to frame mode with Shift F, you can see this geometry. I can move it around and you can see it, you can visualize it. If I press Shift F again, that turns off frame mode. Now if I move this, you can see we're creating this nice sort of step down effect here. Now, if I don't want these to subtract from the head, what I can do is I can move them out into their own folder. So I'll just grab this piece here, drag it outside of that folder, drag this piece up, and then we'll put these into a new folder. I'll select that, click New Folder, and call it Earpiece. And let's drag that other piece into it. There we go, drag that up. And by the way, if you get a start here, you've just clicked on the start menu, or the start sort of option that's there in the subtool. That's the old way of creating Booleans. If that happens, just click on the little thumbnail and it'll go away. It's nothing to be concerned about. I'll turn on subtraction again and make sure visibility is turned on both of these. And now I don't have to worry about subtracting from any of the other parts. The Booleans are only going to impact what's inside this folder. So I'll press the Z key again to bring back up my Spotlight 3D interface. Let's scale this up. I will go ahead and scale this up like so. And let's make another subtraction object by alt-clicking on the Snapshot 3D button. Shift-Z turns off the interface. And now I will move this in the Z direction, and I can get another little bevel there. So let's create something different. I'll press the Z key, and I will just move this altered alpha off to the side. I'll hang on to it. Perhaps I'm going to use that again later. Now I'd like to create another sort of negative cut. So I can grab one of these images here, and you can create these images yourself. They're 512 by 512 pixels, and they're just black and white images. You can load these into your Spotlight by going to Texture, Import, and you can import any image into the Spotlight. We talk about this in more depth in the Spotlight texturing video, but essentially it's quite simple. If you have a grayscale 512 by 512 square image that you want to use to generate geometry, you can just save that out as a PSD, JPEG, and then import it in, and it will automatically load it into the Spotlight. So let's go ahead and grab another one here. This looks like an interesting piece. Once again, I will duplicate it. Again, my preference is to duplicate the originals instead of working on top of them. I find that it just makes things a little bit cleaner and easier to do. So I'll snap to the image center and scale this up. I will rotate it and just hold the Shift key so I can snap my rotations. And let's scale this up and then just position this about here. And if I click, I can move this interface off to the side. Now, if I want to make some changes to this, perhaps I want to grab the endpoint here. You see we've got a green and a purple endpoint right here. If I were to grab these, let me go ahead and move my interface here. There we go. Hold the Shift or the Control key, click and drag, and I can squash this along that axis. If I grab this axis here, I can squash it there. So this green dot is the center of the object underneath. The green line is the axis. So if I snap to that and then Control click drag on one of these axes, I can change the proportion. If I bring this over here, I can snap to this point here. That is the mesh mid-edge. And maybe I want to just scale this forward like this. So it's very easy to do some quick manipulations to these pieces, just like so. So if I want to move this along a single axis, what I need to do is hold down the Shift key and then click drag. So click the axis here, hold Shift, and you can constrain it so your movement only goes along that axis. So Alt-click the Snapshot button. Shift-Z turns off our interface, and now you see we've got a subtraction object that's carving away from those other pieces. So I'll bring that to about there, and that gives us this nice little step down. We're starting to create some interesting greebles or surface details for this hard surface object. Press the Z key again, and I will move this modified alpha over. So let's add something different on here. I will go ahead and grab a rounded square here, and I will duplicate that with the duplicate button. Grab this, and let's snap our interface to the center of the image. Bring it up here, and let's explore some of the other options that we have here. You'll notice that we have the ability to tile. So if I were to take these buttons here, tile V and tile H, I can tile 3 by 3 and then scale this up, and we can get sort of a keypad. So we'll place this here. And I want this to be an addition object, so I'll just click that, and that makes that an add object. Now I will use my, my frame button. Now, if I hold down Alt and then click drag, it will contract. So watch what happens when I do this. It contracts those down, like so. If I undo that with Control Z, I can reset it. If I just click drag it normally, it expands it. So I'm going to create a new one here that's sort of like a button housing. And I'll make that just a regular old addition object. Now I will use that same frame button here. And if we shift click, let's make another expansion like this, and then Alt click on the snapshot button. So I've created 2 add objects and a subtract object. So let's press Shift Z to turn off the interface, and let's take a look at what we've got here now. We'll start with our buttons. I'm going to turn off visibility on the other 2 tools so it's not so confusing. Let's snap to a front view here and hold down the Alt key and just move our pivot over. And I'm just going to scale these buttons down and then countersink them into the surface like this. Now we'll turn on visibility on our other tool here. Let's select that one. And I'll hold down the Alt key and move my pivot and then scale these down. So I've got this nice sort of button housing here. We can countersink those a little bit. Now lastly, we'll turn on our subtraction object here and turn on frame mode so you can actually see what this is doing. I'll hold down the Alt key and just move that pivot along the Z axis. Turn on frame mode, turn off frame mode with Shift F. And then watch what happens as we move this around. Let me turn on frame mode again. Let's move this back to here. Now you see this is sitting outside of these buttons. So I want to make sure that this is subtracting from the main housing. So I'm going to bring this up here. And sometimes you might have to turn your Boolean on and off to see things actually start to work. So let me go ahead and move this up a little bit. I just want to make sure that this is actually intersecting the geometry. So that should be intersecting, and that should be subtracting. There we go. So that is subtracting now. So I'm going to undo my movements there and then scale that up a little bit. Now it's curving away too far, so what I will do is I will move this off, and again, turn on frame mode and you can sort of see what you're doing a lot better. I just want to make this a little bit more narrow, a little bit less deep, I should say, and just countersink that a little bit, turn off frame mode, and there you see we've got this nice recessed hollow into which these buttons are actually sitting. So it actually does feel like there's some kind of structure there that those buttons are part of. And I can bring this forward just a little bit so it's not quite so deep, so you can get a feel that there's some structure there. So let's go back to our interface. I will move these buttons off to the side, and let's grab once again the same sort of square alpha. And what I will do is move my interface up here so I can get to the bottom of it. I will duplicate that piece, bring it over here, and I can snap that now to the mesh center for those buttons. Let's expand this out. And let's scale. Remember that we can squash these if we hold down the Control key and then click drag. I want to do one more little bit of or sort of housing structure around this. I will use my expand button here to create sort of a little gutter that runs around this. Use Control Click Drag to change the size of this. Let's go ahead and Control Click Drag and squash this. And let's maybe scale this whole thing up just a little bit like this. There we go. And I will hold down the Alt key and click Snapshot. Shift Z turns everything off in terms of the interface. And now we've got this nice carved or etched line, creating a little bit of a line of demarcation around that portion of the interface. So let's take a look now at some other things that we can create. If I go back into my interface using the Z hotkey, let's move this over here. Let's take a look at what happens if I grab, say, this image here, duplicate it, bring it over, snap my interface to the center of the image, scale this up, and then let's rotate this. So I'll start rotating and then hold the Shift key so I can snap it, turn this up in terms of scale, and then snap it here. Now on the snapshot, if I hold down Shift and Alt, watch what happens. Shift, Alt, click. This creates the different type of Boolean operation here. You can see right there, it gives me an intersect Boolean. So if I go to Shift Z to turn off the interface, look what happens there. If I turn on frame mode, you can see what this does. Let me bring this all the way down to the bottom. Let me bring this down to the bottom of the folder here. And I'll just click the button there to get rid of the start button, and then turn on and off that again, and then set this to intersection. Use my gizmo to change the thickness so it's quite thin. So I'm going to go to Unmasked Mesh Center with this button right here, and I'm going to expand this in terms of its depth, and then just bring this back in space, turn off frame mode, and look what happens there. As I scale this down, it basically carves away anything that's not part of that volume. So this is an interesting way that you can create some complex shapes. You can also use this to sort of carve off bevels. If I take this and snap rotate it around the y-axis, I can create something along these lines here. See how it's creating that? Let's rotate this so you can see it. It's creating that bevel right there. If I turn my Z depth up and then bring it back down, you see this is carving away. So this is kind of a neat trick here. If I do this, expand this out a bit, I can create a little step down right there. And that's kind of an interesting effect that we're getting along that front plane and along the top planes there. It just adds a bit of interest. So let's create a new part now. We've got this, the beginnings of our communications interface. Maybe we want to create sort of a grid system right here where there's like maybe a speaker housing. So I'll go back to the Z hotkey. Let's scale down this image that we were using and move it off to the side. And then we can just grab the circle again and we'll duplicate it, bring this over here. Now I want to zoom in, so I'm going to press Z or Shift Z to turn off the interface, and I'm just going to zoom in to the piece here. Now I'm going to press the Z hotkey again, snap my pivot to the center of the image, and let's go ahead and increase our tiling and get sort of a grid like this. Let's turn that up. Maybe we want even more of these, so we'll tile it even higher like this. Now I will click Alt and click on the snapshot. Shift Z turns off my interface, and there we have the beginnings of our speaker housing. So I'm going to take the W key to transpose move this piece so it's not sinking all the way down in there. We don't need it to be that deep. So there we can start to get our speaker housing. Now let's try something a little bit different. I want to put another piece going around this, but I don't necessarily want to use just the standard alphas that I've already got here. I want to make something custom. So I will move my model off to the side so we can see things a little bit more clearly. Press the Z key to bring the interface back up. Let's say I want to make some kind of an antenna structure. So I'll grab this piece here, duplicate it, bring it off to the side, and I want to scale this up, and I want to scale it in the Y direction. Now, watch what happens if I were to take a different alpha now. Let's say I want to duplicate this alpha. I'll snap my interface to the center, and then move this over here. So it's just sitting to the side like, say, this. Now, I have the option to create operations on the actual images themselves. I can customize these alphas by manipulating them using the spotlight. So using this button here, the union button, look at the top of the screen. It says click to add, alt-click to sub, and shift-click alt to intersect. So I'm going to alt-click this button here. Now I'll move this over, and you see what it's done. It is subtracted from this alpha, as you can see here. Now, if I were to duplicate this, let me snap to the center and then snap this image to the center. And now I'm going to flip this. I'll just flip H and then move this along this axis. Remember, click and then hold the shift key so you can move along the axis. Now I'm going to alt-click on union again. So we're able to start manipulating these alphas. So let's move these down. I'm going to scale this down so it doesn't take up so much real estate. I will scale this one down so it doesn't take up so much real estate. And then let's grab the circle, or even let's grab our grid. We can take our grid for example. We'll snap this to the center, and let's turn down our number of tiles on this. So I'll just turn this down and turn this down, scale this whole thing down. And let's see, let's get a little bit of intersection there. There we go. Hold down the Alt key and click. And you see what that does is it subtracts. If I want to undo it, I just hit the undo button. If I turn my tiling down entirely, and let's say I want to move this up this way, and then Alt-click on the intersect button, that'll carve that out. Scale this down, and then let's move this down. Alt-click again. Oops, wrong button. Alt-click this one. I accidentally hit the snapshot. Alt-click the union button. There we go. And it carves away. So now I've got a brand new alpha. So I'll press Shift-C to turn off my interface. We'll position our piece here. Press the Z key. Select this alpha. And I just want to position this antenna where I would like it to be. Maybe I don't want it to be quite so large. I'll turn it down a little bit. Position it here, and then just hit the snapshot button. Shift-Z turns my interface off. And of course, it's going to pick up the thickness from whatever subtool I had selected. So I can just easily scale this back down, move it out in Z space, like so. There we go. So we've got a bit of an antenna here. Now maybe we want this to look like it has sort of a slot into which it can slide back and forth, like you can move it forward and backward to get the best possible reception. Well, that's pretty simple to do. I will go ahead and select the main housing here. Make sure I've got that, and I do. Now I will press the Z key. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can create a subtraction object that goes right through in space like this, or we can snap to a side view. We can select the circle alpha again, press the Z key to bring the interface up. We can duplicate this, and remember, we have this neat trick where we can snap this to the object center. Scale this up. Now I am going to create a frame on this. I'm going to turn this to about here. And I'm going to Alt-click to make a subtraction object. Now let's Shift-Z to turn off our interface. So it looks a bit messy right now. This is not what we want yet, but that's fine. We're just going to manually clean this up. So I'll go to B for brush, T for trim, and I'll select trim rectangle. Click OK on the pop-up. And if I hold down Control, Shift, click and drag, I get this marquee. It will cut away anything inside of that marquee. So it's just basically deleting those faces and carving and filling, hole filling. So they are cleaned up and not a problem. I'll use the transpose gizmo here. I'm going to unlock it, reset, and then set it to the unmasked mesh center, then lock it again, and then turn off frame mode. Now we don't see anything yet because it's not really sitting in any sort of intersection point. So I'll move that down and scale it in Z. Turn on frame mode so we can see this a bit better. Let's move this out. We need to really scale this a lot further. So I'm going to scale it in Z like this and then move it back. Shift F turns off frame mode, and now you can see we're carving this cool little notch into which this piece can actually sit. So maybe I want to give it a little bit more, make it a little bit thinner there. So there we go. We've got an extra little bit of detailing there. So I'll press F for focus, and that'll frame the rest of the mesh on screen. And there we go. So now we've got our communications device that we've created for our Wasteland Warrior character. So these are Booleans. Now, we have a whole video just on Booleans, which I encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet, definitely watch that. But I'm going to tell you what you need to know about Booleans now, so you can turn this into actual geometry. Because we put these together in folders, or in a folder, it's very, very simple just to click the folder gear icon and click Boolean folder. And that will execute all those Booleans, turn this into geometry, hide the folder they came from, and then give you a new U-mesh here. This is a unified mesh. If I select that, turn on solo, there's our object. Go into frame mode, you can see that that's actual geometry. That's no longer a Boolean object. So this is printable, it's watertight, it's actual geometry. It can be used in ways the Booleans cannot. So that is SnapShot 3D. It is one of the coolest new ways of making geometry and accessories and costume elements, weapons, anything you can think of. You can make that using SnapShot 3D. It's loaded up under the Lightbox snapshots, and again, they're just grayscale images. You can easily make your own to utilize to create custom shapes. And also be aware that in that Lightbox folder, we only looked at one of the spotlights. There's several others. There's a couple here that we can use to create clothing for the cloth simulation that's new in ZBrush 2021, which we talk about in a separate chapter. And we also have the hard surface pieces here. If I press the Z key, I can double click off those so I can move them all together. Scale that down, you get an idea of what those look like. So there's all sorts of different pieces and parts in here that you can use. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. SnapShot 3D is one of my favorite things to play with in ZBrush. So I hope you take this, go forward, and start using it in your own pipeline. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.